This is Valoroso the 24th, king of Paphlagonia, seated with his queen and only daughter Angelica at their royal breakfast table, receiving the letter which announces to his majesty a proposed visit from Prince Bulbo, heir of Padela, reigning king of Crim Tartary. Remark the delight upon the monarch's royal features. He is so absorbed in the letter that he allows his eggs to get cold and leaves his august muffins untasted. What? That wicked, brave, delightful Prince Bulbo, cries Princess Angelica. Who told you of him, my dear? Asks his majesty. A little bird, says Angelica. Poor Giglio, says Mamma, pouring out the tea. Bother Giglio, cries Angelica, tossing up her head, which is rustled with 1,000 curl papers. Angelica, says the king, I hope you have plenty of new dresses. Your milliner's bills are long enough. My dear queen, you must have some parties. And my love, I should like you to have a new necklace. Order one. Not more than 100 or 150,000 pounds. And Giglio, dear, says the queen, Giglio may go to the... Oh, sir, screams her majesty, your own nephew, our late king's only son. Giglio may go to the tailor's and order the bills to be sent in to Glumboso to pay. Confound him, I mean, bless his dear heart. Give him a couple of guineas for pocket money, my dear, and you may as well order yourself bracelets while you are about the necklace, Mrs. V. Her Majesty, or Mrs. V, as the king called her, embraced her husband, and twining her arm around her daughter's waist, they quitted the breakfast room to make all things ready for the princely stranger. When they were gone, the smile that lighted up the eyes of the husband and father fled. He began to think to himself, why did I steal my nephew's, my young Giglio's? Steal, said I? No, not steal. I took, and with my royal arm I wield the sceptral rod of Paphlagonia, and on my manly head I set the royal crown of Paphlagonia. I took, and in my outstretched hand I hold the royal orb of Paphlagonia. Could a boy, a sniveling, dribbling boy, was in his nurse's arms but yesterday and cried for sugar plums, bear up the awful weight of crown, orb, scepter, and meet and fight with tough Cramian foe? The marriage of Angelica and Bulbo will unite two nations which have been engaged in bloody and expensive wars, the Paphlagonians and the Crimeans. Were my brother King Savio alive, he would certainly will away the crown from his own son to bring about such a desirable union. Thus easily do we deceive ourselves. Thus do we fancy what we wish is right. The king took courage and read the papers, finished his muffins and eggs, and rang the bell for his prime minister. Now, the truth of the matter was that when the King Savio died, leaving his brother Valoroso as guardian of his infant son, the unfaithful guardian had himself proclaimed sovereign of Paphlagonia under the title of King Valoroso the 24th. Prince Giglio, by reason of his tender age, did not feel the loss of his crown and empire. As long as he had plenty of toys and sweetmeats, a holiday 5 times a week, and above all, the company of his darling cousin Angelica, the king's only daughter, Giglio was perfectly contented. Nor did he envy his uncle, the great, hot, uncomfortable throne of state, an enormous, cumbersome crown in which the monarch appeared from morning till night. No doubt the queen must have been lovely in her youth, though she grew rather stout in her in after life. She was kind to her nephew, and if she had any scruples about her husband's taking the young prince's crown, she consoled herself by thinking that, at his death, Prince Giglio would be restored to his throne and share it with his cousin whom he loved so fondly. The prime minister was Glumboso, an old statesman whose hands the monarch left all the affairs of the kingdom. All Valoroso wanted was plenty of money, plenty of hunting, plenty of flattery, and as little trouble as possible. He had statues erected to himself in every city of the empire. He was Valoroso the magnanimous, Valoroso the victorious, Valoroso the great. This royal pair had one only child, the Princess Angelica. It was said she had the longest hair, the largest eyes, the slimmest waist, the smallest foot, and the most lovely complexion of any young lady in the Paphlagonian dominions. Her accomplishments were announced to be even superior to her beauty. She could play the most difficult pieces of music at sight. She knew every date in the history of Paphlagonia and every other country. She knew French, English, Italian, German, Spanish, Hebrew, Greek, Latin, Cappadocian, Samothracian, Aegean, and Crim Tartar. In a word, she was a most accomplished young creature, and her governess was Countess Gruffanuff. Would you not fancy from this picture that Gruffanuff must have been a person of the highest birth? She looked so haughty that I should have thought her a princess at least. The fact is, she had been a maidservant to the queen, and her husband had been a head footman. After his disappearance, of which you shall hear more presently, this Mrs. Gruffanuff, by flattering and wheedling and toadying and to her royal mistress, became a favorite with the queen, who gave her a title and made her governess to the princess. And now, to tell you why the princess had such a wonderful character for learning and accomplishments when she was as idle as possible, I must go back ever so far and tell you about the fairy Blackstick. Between the kingdoms of Paphlagonia and Crim Tartary, there lived a mysterious personage who was known as the fairy Blackstick. From the ebony wand or crutch on which she rode to the moon sometimes, or upon other excursions of business or pleasure and with which she performed her wonders, when she was young, she was always whizzing about from one kingdom to another upon her fairy Blackstick, conferring her fairy favors upon this prince or that. She had turned numberless wicked people into beasts, birds, millstones, clocks, pumps, bootjacks, umbrellas, and other absurd shapes. But after 2,000 or 3,000 years of this sport, Blackstick grew tired of it. Or perhaps she thought, what good am I doing by setting this princess to sleep for 100 years, or fixing a black pudding onto that booby's nose? I begin to think I do as much harm as good by my performances. Yes, there were my 2 young goddaughters, King Savio's wife and Duke Padella's wife. I gave them each a present to render them charming in the eyes of their husbands. But what good did my rose and my ring do to those 2 women? None on earth. From having all their whims indulged by their husbands, they became lazy, ill-humored, absurdly vain. They used actually to patronize me, the fairy Blackstick, who could have turned them into baboons and their diamonds into strings of onions by a single wave of my rod. So she locked up her books in her cupboard and scarcely used her wand at all, except as a cane to walk about with. The Queen of Paphlagonia presented His Majesty with a son and heir, and guns were fired, the capital illuminated, and no end of feast ordained to celebrate. Why? The prince's birth. It was thought the... All right, go get it. Get the fairy, who was asked to be his godmother, would at least have presented him with an invisible jacket or a flying horse, but instead Blackstick went up to the cradle of the child Giglio and said, "My poor child, the very best thing I can send you is a little misfortune." And this was all she would utter, to the disgust of Giglio's parents, who died very soon after, when Giglio's uncle took the throne. In like manner, when Cavolfiore, king of Crim Tartary, had a christening of his only child, Rosalba, the fairy Blackstick was not more gracious. Whilst everybody was exclaiming over the beauty of the darling child, the fairy Blackstick looked very sadly at the baby and its mother and said, "My good woman," for the fairy was very familiar and no more minded a queen than a washerwoman. "My good woman." What, Lisa? It's downstairs in the kitchen. These people who are following you will be the first to turn against you. And as for this little lady, the best thing I can wish her is a little misfortune. So she touched Rosalba with her black wand, looked severely at the courtiers, motioned the queen adieu with her hand, and sailed slowly up into the air out of the window. When she was gone, the court people, who had been awed and silent in her presence, began to speak. "What an odious fairy she is, a pretty fairy indeed." They said, "Why, she went to the king of Paphlagonia's christening and pretended to do all sorts of things for that family. And what has happened? Prince Giglio, her godson, has been turned off his throne by his uncle. Would we allow our sweet princess to be deprived of her rights by an enemy? Never, 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 never." And they all shouted in a chorus, "Never, never, never, never." Now, how did these fine courtiers show their fidelity? The Duke of Padea, father of Prince Bulbo, rebelled against the king, who went out to chastise his rebellious subjects. "Anyone rebel against our beloved and august monarch," cried the courtiers. "Anyone resist him? Pooh! He is invincible, irresistible. He will bring home Padella a prisoner and tie him to the donkey's tail." The king went forth to vanquish Padella, and the poor queen, who was very timid, anxious creature, grew so frightened and ill that she died, leaving injunctions with her ladies to take care of the dear little Rosalba. Of course, They said they would. Of course, they vowed they would die rather than harm. What, Lisa? Should happen to the princess. At first, the Crim Tartar court journal stated that the king was obtaining great victories. What? The
Mommy's house.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
like that. So I want to keep it closed.
All right. They at first, the Crim Tartar court journal stated the king was obtaining great victories over the audacious rebel. The troops of the infamous Padella were in flight. Then the news came that King Cavolfiore was vanquished and slain by His Majesty King Padella the First. At this news, half the courtiers ran to pay their duty to the conquering chief, and the other half ran away, laying hands on all these best articles in the palace. Poor little Rosalba was left there quite alone. She toddled from one room to another, crying, "Countess, Duchess!" Only she said, "Countess, Duchess!" Not being able to speak plainly. "Bring me my mutton sop, my Royal Highness Hungy." She went from the private apartments into the throne room, and nobody was there, and thence into the ballroom, and nobody was there. She toddled down the great staircase into the hall, and nobody was there. As the door was open, she went into the garden, and thence into the forest, where the wild beasts live, and was never heard of any more. A piece of her torn mantle and one of her shoes were found in the wood in the mouths of 2 lionesses' cubs, whom King Padella and a royal hunting party shot. "So the poor little princess is done for," said he. "Well, what's done can't be helped. Gentlemen, let us go to a luncheon." And one of the courtiers took up the shoe and put it in his pocket, and there was an end of Rosalba. When the Princess Angelica was born, her parents not only did not ask the fairy Blackstick to the christening party, but gave orders to the porter absolutely to refuse her if she called. The porter's name was Gruffanuff, and he had been selected for the post because he was very tall. He was a very tall, fierce man who could say, "Not at home," to an unwelcome visitor with the rudeness which frightened most of such persons away. He was the husband of Countess Gruffanuff, and they quarreled from morning till night. Now this fellow tried his rudeness once too often, for when the fairy Blackstick came to call on the prince and princess, who were actually sitting at the opening drawing room window, Gruffanuff not only said they were not at home, but he made the most odious vulgar sign. "Get away, old Blackstick," said he. "I tell you, master and missus ain't home to you." He was going to slam the door when the fairy with her wand prevented the door being shut. Gruffanuff came out again in a fury and asked the fairy whether she thought he was going to stay at the door all day. "What, Lisa? You are going to stay at that door all day and all night, and for many a long year," said the fairy very majestically. "Ha, ha, ha! That is a good un," said Gruffanuff. "Ha, ha, what's this? Let me down," for as the fairy waved her wand, he felt himself rising off the ground and fluttering up against the door. A screw ran into the stomach, and he was pinned to the door. His arms flew up over his head, and his legs twisted under his body. He felt, "What, Lisa? Come here!" He felt cold growing over him, as if he was turning into metal, and he said, "Oh, him!" And he could say no more because he was dumb. He was neither neither more nor less a knocker, a brass knocker. And there he was, screwed to the door in the blazing summer day till he burned almost red hot. And there he was, screwed to the door all the bitter winter nights till the brass nose was dripping with icelets, and the postman came and rapped at him. And the vulgarest boy with a letter came and hit him up against the door, and the housemaid came and scrubbed his nose with sandpaper. He had plenty of leisure now to repent of having been rude to the fairy Blackstick. As for his wife, she did not miss him, as he was always guzzling beer, notoriously quarreling, and in debt to tradesmen. What, Lisa? It was supposed... I will get your water. We can have water from the bathroom. Now, one day, when the Princess Angelica was quite a little girl, she was walking in the garden of the palace with Mrs. Gruffanuff, holding a parasol over her head to keep her complexion from the freckles. Angelica was carrying a bun to feed the swans and ducks in the royal pond. When there, she came toddling up to such a funny little girl. She had a great quantity of hair blowing about her chubby little cheeks, and looked as if she had not been washed or combed for ever so long. She wore a ragged bit of cloak, and had only one shoe on. "You little wretch, who let you in here?" asked Gruffanuff. "Give me dat bun," said the little girl. "Me velly hungry." "Hungry? What is that?" asked Princess Angelica, and gave the child the bun. "Oh, Princess," said Gruffanuff, "how good, how kind you are. See, your Majesty," she said to the king and queen, who now came up with Prince Giglio. What, Lisa? Oh, what can't you open? Oh, Lisa. Now, where was I? I didn't want the bun, said Angelica. You're a darling little angel just the same, said the governess. Yes, I know I am, said Angelica. Dirty little girl, don't you think I am very pretty? Oh, Pooty, Pooty, said the little girl, capering about, laughing and dancing and munching her bun. As she ate, she began to sing, Oh, what fun to have a plum bun. How I wish it never was done. Angelica, Giglio, and the king and queen began to laugh very merrily. I can dance as well as sing, said the little girl. I can dance, and I can sing, and I can do all sorts of ting. And she ran to a flower bed, made herself a wreath, and danced before the king and queen so drolly and prettily that everybody was delighted. Who was your mother? Who were your relations? Said the queen. The little girl said, Little lion was my brother, great big lioness was my mother. Never heard of any other. And she capered away on her one shoe, and everybody was exceedingly diverted. So Angelica said to the queen, Mama, my parrot flew away yesterday, and I don't care any more for my toys. And I think this funny little child will amuse me. I will take her home and give her some of my old frocks, which I have worn ever so many times and am quite tired of. Oh, the generous darling, said Gruffanuff. The child clapped hands and said, Go home with you, yes, you pooty princess. Have a nice dinner and wear a new dress. And they all laughed again and took the child home to the palace where, when she was washed and combed and had one of the princess's frocks given her, she looked as handsome as Angelica, almost. In order that the little girl should not become too proud and conceited, Mrs. Gruffanuff took her old ragged mantle and one shoe and put them into a glass box with a card laid upon them upon which was written, These were the old clothes in which little Betsinda was found when the great goodness and admirable kindness of Her Royal Highness, the Princess Angelica, received this little outcast. For a while, little Betsinda was a great favorite with the princess, but when the princess got a monkey and afterwards a little dog and afterwards a doll, she did not care for Betsinda anymore. Betsinda became very melancholy and quiet and sang no more funny songs because nobody cared to hear her. Then, as she grew older, she was made a lady's maid to the princess. She worked and mended and put Angelica's hair in papers and was never cross when scolded. Whilst the princess was having her masters in music, drawing and dancing, and languages, Betsinda would sit and watch. And in this way she picked up a great deal of learning, for she was always awake to her mistress, though her mistress was not. When the princess was going out, she would say, My good Betsinda, you may as well finish what I have begun. Yes, miss, Betsinda would say, and sit down cheerfully, down very cheerfully, not to finish what Angelica began, but to do it. And Angelica actually believed that she did these things herself and received all the flattery of the court, as if every word of it was true. And now, let us speak about Prince Giglio, the nephew of the king. The young prince was very good-natured and did not care for the loss of his crown. Being a thoughtless youth, not much inclined to politics or any kind of learning, on the other hand, the king's gamekeepers and huntsmen found the prince an apt pupil. The first lord of the billiard table gave the most flattering reports of the prince's skill. So did the groom of the tennis court, and as for the captain of the guard and the fencing master, the valiant count cut us off heads off. He vowed he never had encountered so expert a swordsman as Prince Giglio. Her Majesty the Queen always wished that Angelica and Giglio would marry. So did Giglio, so did Angelica sometimes, but then, you know, she was so clever and Giglio knew nothing. Lisa, quiet. When they looked at the stars, what did Giglio know of? Lisa, stop it. They know of the heavenly bodies. He had never heard of the constellation of the Bear. She's listening to the story. Stop it. He never because you're not supposed to be talking. He had never even heard of the constellation of the Bear. Lisa, stop it. Once when on a sweet night in a balcony where they were standing, Angelica said, There is the bear. Where? Said Giglio. Don't be afraid. Lisa, stop it. Don't be afraid, Angelica. If a dozen bears come, I will kill them rather than they shall hurt you. Oh, you silly, said she. You are good, but not very wise. When Prince Giglio marries the princess and comes to the throne, we, who have always been unkind to him, shall lose...
She hit me
Lisa, go to bed.
very, very hard.
Go to bed. Go to bed.
It hurts very, very much.
I'll
She
give
hurt
you a
me
kiss.
so hard.
Lisa, go to bed. Go to bed. Go to bed. You hit your sister. Go to bed. Go to bed. Don't be afraid, Angelica, if a dozen bears come. I will kill them rather than they should hurt you. Oh, you silly, said she. You are good, but not very wise. When Prince Giglio marries the princess and comes to the throne, we, who have always been unkind to him, shall lose our places in a trice, thought Gruffanuff and Glumboso, the prime minister of Paphlagonia. So these unprincipled people invented 100 cruel stories about poor Giglio in order to influence the king, queen, and princess against him. How he was so ignorant that he could not spell the commonest words, how he owed ever so much money to the pastry cooks, how he used to go to sleep in church. All this backbiting had an effect on Prince Angelica, who began to look coldly on her cousin, then to laugh at him, and at court balls to treat him so unkindly that poor Giglio became quite ill, took to his bed, and sent for a doctor. Whilst he was lying sick, there came to the court a painter whose name was Tommaso Lorenzo, and he was painter in ordinary to the king of Crim Tartary. One day Lorenzo showed the princess a portrait of a young man in armor, with fair hair and the loveliest blue eyes. Dear Signor Lorenzo, who is that? Asked the princess. I never saw anyone so handsome, says Gruffanuff, the old humbug. That, said the painter. Lisa, go to bed. That, madam, is the portrait of my august young master, His Royal Highness Bulbo, Crown Prince of Crim Tartary, and Knight Grand Cross of the Order of the Pumpkin. That is the Order of the Pumpkin, glittering on his manly breast, received from King Padella I for gallantry at the Battle of Rimbombamento, when he slew 211 giants. Lisa, you hit your sister. Why are you crying? What a prince, thought Angelica. So brave, so young. He is as accomplished as he is brave. Lisa, he is as accomplished as he is brave, continued the painter. He knows all languages, composes operas, and danced in a ballet in which he looked so beautiful that his cousin, the lovely daughter of the king of Circassia, died for the love of him. Why did he not marry the poor princess, sighed Angelica. The prince had given his heart elsewhere, said the painter. And to whom? Asked her Royal Highness. I am not at liberty to mention the princess's name. Does it begin with a Z? Asked Angelica. The painter said it wasn't a Z. Then she tried a Y and went backwards through the alphabet. Then she came to B, and it wasn't B. Oh, dearest Gruffanuff, she said, lend me your smelling bottle. And hiding her head on the countess's shoulder, she faintly whispered, Ah, signor, can it be an A? It was A. And though I may not tell your Royal Highness the princess's name, whom he fondly, madly, devotedly, rapturously loves, I may show you her portrait, said the Slybots, and leading the princess up to a gilt frame, he drew back a curtain. Goodness! The frame contained a looking-glass, and Angelica saw her own face. In the meanwhile, poor Giglio lay upstairs in his chamber, very sick. The only person who visited him was little Betsinda, the housemaid, who used to bring him his gruel and warm his bed. When the little housemaid visited him this morning and evening, Prince Giglio used to say, Betsinda, has the Princess Angelica asked for me today? And Betsinda would answer, No, my lord, not today, but she was such a good-natured creature that she brought up the roast chicken and jellies from the kitchen, saying the princess had made the jelly or the bread sauce with her own hands on purpose for Giglio. When Giglio heard this, he took heart and began to mend immediately. He felt so much better the next day that he dressed and went downstairs, where whom should he meet but Angelica, going into the drawing room. All the covers were off the chairs, the chandeliers taken out of the bags, and the damask curtains uncovered. Angelica had her hair in the curl papers. In a word, it was evident there was going to be a party. Heavens, Giglio, cried Angelica, you here in such a dress? Yes, dear Angelica, I can come downstairs today thanks to the fowl and the jelly. What do I know about fowls and jelly? Said Angelica. Why didn't you send them, Angelica dear? Said Giglio. I send them? Angelica, dear, no, Giglio, dear, she said, mocking him. I was engaged getting the rooms ready for His Royal Highness, the Prince of Crim Tartary, who is coming to pay my papa a visit. The Prince of Crim Tartary, Giglio said aghast. Yes, the Prince of Crim Tartary, said Angelica. I dare say you never heard of such a country. What did you ever hear of? You are so ignorant you are not fit for society. Go and put your best clothes on to receive the prince. And let me get the drawing room ready. Giglio said, Oh, Angelica, Angelica, I didn't think this of you. This wasn't your language to me when you gave me this ring, and I gave you mine in the garden, and gave me that K. But Angelica in a rage cried, Get out, you saucy, rude creature. How dare you remind me of your rudeness? As for your little trumpery 2-penny ring, there, sir, there. And she flung it out the window. It was my mother's marriage ring, cried Giglio. I don't care whose marriage ring it was, cried Angelica. Marry the person who picks it up. You shan't marry me. Now Angelica little knew that the ring which Giglio had given her was the fairy ring, which Blackstick had given to Giglio's mother. If a man wore it, it made all the women love him. If a woman, all the gentlemen. The queen, Giglio's mother, was admired immensely while she wore this ring. But when she called little Giglio and put the ring on his finger, everyone's love was transferred to him. And when, as quite a child, Giglio gave it to Angelica, people began to love her. Yes, said Angelica in her foolish and grateful way. I know who'll give me so much finer things than your beggarly little pearl nonsense. Very good, miss. You may take back your ring, too, said Giglio. And then, as if his eyes had been suddenly opened, he cried, Is this the woman I have been in love with all my life? Why, actually, yes. You are a little crooked. Oh, you wretch, cried Angelica, and upon my conscience, you squint a little. You brute, you, Angelica screamed out, when with a low bow the first lord in waiting entered and said, Royal Highnesses, their majesties expect you in the pink throne room, where they await the arrival of the Prince of Crim Tartary. Prince Bulbo's arrival had set all the court in a flutter. Everybody was ordered to put on his or her best clothes. The footmen had their gala liveries, the Lord Chancellor his new wig, and Countess Gruffanuff, you may be sure, was glad of an opportunity to decorate her old person with the finest things. She was walking through the court on her way to wait upon their majesties when she spied something glittering on the pavement and bade the boy in buttons, who was holding up her train, Go and pick it up. It was a trumpery little ring. It was a trumpery little ring too small for the old knuckles, so she put it in her pocket. Oh, Mum, said the boy, looking at her. How beautiful. You do look, Mum, today, Mum. The guards saluted her with peculiar respect. Captain Headsoff said, My dear madam, you look like an angel today. And so, bowing and smirking, Gruffanuff went in and took her place behind her royal master and mistress. Princess Angelica sat at their feet, and behind the king's chair stood Prince Giglio, looking very savage. The Prince of Crim Tartary made his appearance, attended by Baron Slyboots, his chamberlain, and followed by a black page carrying the most beautiful crown. He was dressed in his traveling costume, and his hair, as you can see, was in a little disorder. I have ridden 300 miles since breakfast, said he. So eager was I to behold the court and august family of Paphlagonia, and I could not wait 1 minute before appearing in your majesty's presences. Giglio burst out with a roar of contemptuous laughter. Your highness is welcome in any dress, said the king, and dress his royal highness wears is a court dress, said Princess Angelica, smiling graciously. But you should see my other clothes, said the prince. I should have had them on, but that stupid carrier has not brought them. Who's that laughing? It was Giglio laughing. I was laughing, he said, because you said that just now that you were in such a hurry to see the princess you could not wait to change your dress, and now you come in these other clothes because you have no other. You come in these clothes because you have no others. And who are you? Said Prince Bulbo very fiercely. My father was king of this country, and I am his only son, replied Giglio with equal haughtiness. Ha, said the king and Glumboso, looking very flurried. But the king, collecting himself, said, Dear Prince Bulbo, I forgot to introduce you to your royal highness. My dear nephew is Royal Highness Prince Giglio. Giglio, give his royal highness your hand. And Giglio, giving his hand, squeezed poor Bulbo's until the tears ran out of his eyes. Glumboso now brought a chair for his royal visitor, but he placed it on the edge of the platform on which the king, queen, and princess were seated. As Bulbo sat down, it toppled over, and he with it, rolling over and over and over, bellowing like a bull. Giglio roared still louder at this disaster, and so did all the court, for as Bobo stood up from his fall, he looked so exceedingly plain and foolish that nobody could help laughing. When he had entered the room, he was observed to carry a rose in his hand, which fell out of it when he tumbled. My rose, cried Bobo, and his chamberlain picked it up and gave it to the prince, who put it in his waistcoat. Then people wondered why they had laughed. There was nothing particularly ridiculous about him, so they sat and talked. The royal personages together, Giglio, were very comfortable with Gruffanuff behind the throne. He looked at her with such tender eyes that her heart was all in a flutter. Oh, dear prince, she said, how could you speak so haughtily in the presence of their majesties? I thought I should have fainted. I should have caught you in my arms, said Giglio, looking rapturous. Why were you so cruel to Prince Bobo, dear prince, said Gruffanuff. Because I hate him, replied Giglio. You are jealous of him and still love poor Angelica, cried Gruffanuff, putting her handkerchief to her eyes. I did, but I love her no more, Giglio cried. What are you two people chattering about there, said the queen. It is time to dress for dinner. When Prince Bobo got to his room, he found his luggage there and unpacked, and the hairdresser cut and curled him. When the dinner bell rang, the royal company had not to wait about 25 minutes until Prince Bobo appeared, and as for Giglio, he never left Madame Gruffanuff's all this time, but stood with her in a window, paying her compliments at length. At length, the groom of the chambers announced His Royal Highness the Prince of Crim Tartary. The noble company went into the royal dining room. You may be sure they had a very good dinner, after which His Majesty and the Queen went to sleep in their armchairs. Bobo went and sat by the piano, where Angelica was playing and singing, and he sang out of tune, and upset the coffee and talked absurdly, and fell asleep and snored horribly. But Angelica still persisted in thinking of him the most beautiful of human beings. No doubt the magic rose which Bobo wore caused this infatuation on Angelica's part. Giglio must go and sit by Gruffanuff, whose old face he every moment began to find more lovely. He paid the most outrageous compliments to her. There never was such a darling, older than he, fiddle-dee-dee. He would marry her. He would have no one but her. Marry the heir to the throne. Ere was a chance. The artful hussy got a sheet of paper and wrote it. This is to give notice that I, Giglio, son of Savio, king of Paphlagonia, hereby promise to marry the charming and virtuous Barbara Griselda, Countess Gruffanuff, and widow of the late Jenkins Gruffanuff, Esquire. What is it you are writing, you charming Gruffy? Said Giglio. Oh, only an order for you to sign, dear prince, for giving coals and blankets to the poor this cold weather. Look, the king and queen are both asleep, and your royal highness's order will do. So Giglio, who was very good-natured, as Gruffy well knew, signed the order immediately, and when she had it in her pocket, what airs she gave herself! She was ready to flounce it out of the room before the queen, and as now she was the wife of the rightful king of Paphlagonia. And when candles came and she had helped undress the queen and princess, she went to her room. She practiced writing her own name with all the titles of a queen. Little Betsinda came to put Gruffanuff's hair in curl papers, and the countess was so pleased that for a wonder
We're on the beach.
she complimented Betsinda. Betsinda, she said, you dressed my hair very nicely today. I promised you a present. Here is a pretty little ring that I picked, that I have had some time, and she gave Betsinda the ring she had picked up in the court. It's like the ring the princess used to wear, said the maid. No such a thing, said Gruffanuff. I have had this ever so long. There, tuck me up quite comfortable, and as the very cold night, you may go and warm dear Prince Giglio's bed. I had best warm both the young gentlemen's beds, said Betsinda. Gruffanuff for reply said, Ho, ho, gra-ho, ho, hunga, ho, ho. In fact, she was snoring and sound asleep. Betsinda went first to Prince Giglio's bed with her warming pan, then to Prince Bobo's room. Prince Bobo came in, and as soon as he saw her, he cried, Oh, 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 what a beautiful creature you are. You angel, you pearl, you rosebud, fly to the desert with me, be mine, be mine, be mine. Go away, please, your royal highness, said Betsinda. But Bobo said, No, never till thou sweetest swearest to be mine, thou lovely blushing chambermaid divine. Here at thy feet the royal Bobo lies, the trembling captive of Betsinda's eyes. And he went on, making himself so absurd and ridiculous that Betsinda, who was full of fun, gave him a touch with the warming pan. That made him cry, Oh, in a very different manner. Prince Bobo made such a noise that Prince Giglio, who was heard him, came into to see what was the matter, And as soon as he saw what was taking place, Giglio in a fury rushed on Bobo, kicking him till his hair was quite out of curl. Poor Betsinda did not know whether to laugh or cry, and when Giglio had done knocking Bobo about, what do you think Giglio does? He goes down on his knees to Betsinda, takes her hand, begs her to accept his heart, and offers to marry her that moment. Fancy Betsinda's condition, who had been in love with the prince ever since she saw him in the palace garden when she was quite a little child. "Oh, divine Betsinda," says the prince, "how have I lived 15 years in thy company without seeing thy perfections? Angelica, pish, Gruffanuff, foo, the queen, ha, ha, thou art my queen. O prince, I am but a poor chambermaid," says Betsinda. "Didst thou not tend me in my sickness when all forsook me?" continues Giglio. "Did not thy gentle hand smooth my pillow and bring my jelly and chicken? And I sewed your royal highness's shirt buttons on too, if it please your royal highness," cries this little artless maiden. When Prince Bobo, now madly in love with Betsinda, saw the unmistakable glances which Betsinda flung upon Giglio, he began to cry bitterly and tore quantities of hair out of his head. And was it Giglio? And as the princes now began to quarrel, and he was very fierce with one another, and be very fierce with one another, Betsinda thought proper to run away. "You great big blubbering booby," cried Giglio. "You dare to kneel down at Princess Giglio's knees and kiss her feet?" "She's not Princess Giglio," roars out Bobo. "She shall be Princess Bulbo. No other shall be Princess Bulbo. I'll have your life," cries Giglio. I'll run you through," cries Bobo. "I'll cut your throat. I'll blow your brains out. I'll kick your head off." "We'll meet again," says Giglio, shaking his fist in Bobo's face. And seizing up the warming pan, he rushed downstairs. What should he see on his landing but His Majesty talking to Betsinda? His Majesty had heard the row in the building and the smelling something burning. They'd come out to see what the matter was. "It's the young gentleman, smoking perhaps, sir," said Betsinda. "Young men, turn thine eyes on middle-aged autocrat, who has been considered not ill-looking in this time." "Oh, sir, what will Her Majesty say?" cries Betsinda. "Her Majesty," laughs the monarch, "Her Majesty be hanged. Runs not by a river, but by my palace wall. Have I not sacks to sew up wives withal? Say but the word, and thou wilt be mine. Own your mistress straightway, in a sack, in a sewn, and thou the sharer of my heart and throne." When Giglio heard these atrocious sentiments, he forgot the respect unusually paid to royalty. He lifted up the warming pan and knocked the king flat as a pancake, after which Master Giglio took to his heels and ran away. Betsinda went off screaming, and the queen, Gruffanuff, and the princess all came out of their rooms. Fancy their feelings on beholding their husband, father, sovereign in such posture. As soon as the coals began to burn him, the king came to himself and stood up. Oh, piteous spectacle! The king's nose was bent quite crooked by the blow of Prince Giglio. His Majesty ground his teeth with rage. "Oh, my captain of the guard!" he cried. "Heads off, seize the prince!" But now he dared, with sacrilegious hand, to strike the sacred nightcap of a king, and floor me with the warming pan. "The villain die! See it be done!" And lifting up the tails of his dress gown, the king entered his own room, followed by the queen and the princess. Captain Hedzoff was very much affected, having a sincere love for Giglio. Poor Giglio," he said, the tears rolling over his manly face. "My noble young prince, it is my hand must lead thee to death." "Lead Hugh to Fiddlestick," Hedzoff said, a female voice. It was Gruffanuff. The king said, "You were to hang the prince." "Well, hang the prince." "I don't understand," said Hedzoff, who was not a very clever man. "You, Gabby, he didn't say which prince," said Gruffanuff. "Well, then, take Bobo and hang him." When Captain Hedzoff heard this, he began to dance for joy. "Prince Bobo's head will do capitally," he said, and he went to arrest the prince, the very thing next morning. "Pooh, my good man." "Stop," I said, was all the luckless Bulbo could say, for Hedzoff's guards, seizing him, tied a handkerchief over his mouth and carried him to the place of execution. Gruffanuff got up early next morning to devise some plan for rescuing her darling husband. As the silly old thing insisted on calling Giglio, she found him walking in the garden, thinking up a rhyme for Betsinda, having indeed forgotten all about the past evening. "Well, dear Giglio," said Gruffanuff. "Well, dear Giglio," says Giglio. "Well, dear Gruffy," says Giglio. Only he was satirical. "I have been thinking, darling, what you must do in this scrape. You must fly the country for a while. Fly the country? Never without her, I love, says Giglio. No, she will accompany you, dear prince. She says in her most coaxing accents. First, we must get the jewels of the king and queen. Here is the key duck. They're all yours by right, you know, and having got the jewels, go to Glumboso's apartment, where under his head you will find sacks containing money which he took from your royal father's room on the day of his death. With this we will fly. We will fly, said Giglio. Yes, your bride, your Gruffy, says the countess with a languishing leer. You, my bride, said Giglio. You hideous old woman. Oh, you wretch. Didn't you give me the paper promising marriage, says Gruffanuff. Get away, you old goose. I love Betsinda and Betsinda only. And in a fit of terror, Giglio ran from her as quickly as he could. He, shrieks of Gruffanuff. A promise is a promise if there are laws in Paphlagonia. And as for the vixen Betsinda, Master Giglio may look long before finding her, I warrant. Alas, and woe is me. Very lamentable events had occurred to Betsinda that morning. The king had offered to marry her, of course. Her Majesty the Queen was jealous. Bobo had fallen in love with her. Of course Angelica was furious. Giglio was in love with her, and oh, what a fury Gruffy was in. Take off that cap I gave you. Take off that petticoat I gave you. Take off that gown I gave you. They said all at once and began tearing the clothes off poor Betsinda. Give her the rags she wore when she came to the house, and turn her out, cried the queen. Taking up the queen's poker, the cruel Gruffanuff drove Betsinda into her room. The countess went to the glass box in which she had kept Betsinda's old cloak and shoe just ever so long and said, Take those rags, you little beggar creature, and strip off everything belonging to honest people and go about your business. And she actually tore off the poor little delicate things back. She actually tore off the poor little delicate things back, almost all her clothes. Are you still listening to this? All right. Poor Betsinda huddled the cloak. Stop it, Lisa. Huddled the cloak round her on which her embroidered the letters Prin, Rosal, and then came a great rent. As for the shoe, what was she to do with one poor little tootsie sandal? The string was still fastened to it, so she hung it around her neck. Won't you give me a pair of shoes to go out in the snow? Mum, Lisa, if you please. Mum, stop it, cried the poor child. No, you wicked beast, said Gruffanuff, driving her along with the poker, driving her down the cold stairs, driving her through the cold... Lisa, what are you doing? Driving her down the... Lisa, come over here. Driving her through the cold hall, flinging her out into the cold street, so that the knocker itself shed tears to see her. But a kind fairy made the soft snow warm for her little feet, and she wrapped herself up in the ermine of her mantle and was gone. And now let us think about breakfast, says the greedy queen. 9 o'clock came, and they were in the breakfast room, and no Prince Bobo as yet. The urn was hissing, the muffins were smoking, the eggs were done. There was a pot of raspberry jam and coffee, and a beautiful chicken on the sideboard, and the cook brought in the sausages. Oh, how nice they smelled. Where is Bobo, said the king. At this moment, Glumboso entered with Captain Hedzoff, both looking very much disturbed. I am afraid, your majesty, cries Glumboso. No business before breakfast, Glum, says the king. Breakfast first, business next. Mrs. V, some more sugar. Sire, I am afraid if we wait till after breakfast, it will be too late, says Glumboso. He'll be hanged at 9:30. Lisa, don't talk about hanging, and spoil my breakfast, you unkind, vulgar man, cries the princess. Pray, who is to be hanged? Sire, it is the prince, whispers Glumboso to the king. Talk about business after breakfast, I tell you, says his majesty, quite sulky. We shall have a war, sire, depend on it, says the minister, his father, King Padella. Lisa, come up here. Lisa. King who, says the king. Padella is not Giglio's father. It's Prince Bobo. They are hanging, sire. Not Prince Giglio's, says the prime minister. You told me to hang the prince, and I took the ugly one, says Hedzoff. I didn't think your majesty intended to murder your own flesh and blood. The king, for all reply, flung the plate of sausage at his Hedzoff's head. The prince cried, Hee, kari, and fell down in a fainting fit. turned the cock of the urn upon her royal highness and the king, and the boiling water gradually revived her. His majesty looked at his watch. "The question is," said he, "am I fast or slow? If I'm slow, we may as well go on with the breakfast. If I'm fast, there is just the possibility of saving Prince Bobo. 100,000 plagues upon you. Can't you see that while you're talking, my Bobo is being hung?" screamed the princess. "By Jove, she's always right," said the king, looking at his watch again. "There go the drums. What a deuced awkward thing. Oh, Papa, you goose. Write the reprieve and let him run with it," cries the princess, and she got a sheet of paper and pen and ink. "Confound it, where are my spectacles?" the monarch exclaimed. At last the spectacles were got, and the king mended his pen and signed the reprieve, and Angelica ran with as swift as the wind. "You better stay, my love, and finish the muffins. There's no use going." "Be sure it's too late," said the monarch. Hand me over the raspberry jam." Angelica ran and ran. She ran through the marketplace and over the bridge and round the square, and she came to the execution place, where she saw Bobo lying his head on the block. The executioner raised his axe, but at that moment the princess came up, panting, and cried, "Reprieve! Reprieve!" Up the scaffold stairs she sprang, and flinging herself onto Bobo's arm, she cried, "Oh, my prince, my love! Thine Angelica has come in time to save thy precious existence." "I tell you what it is, Angelica," said Bobo. "Since I came here yesterday, there has been such a row and disturbance and quarreling and chopping off of heads that I'm inclined to go back to Crim Tartary. But with me as thy bride, my Bobo." "Well, well, I suppose as we must be married," said Bobo. "But, in the name of peace, do let us go back to breakfast." Bobo had carried in his mouth all the time of the dismal ceremony the fairy rose, which his mother had told him never to part with. He had kept it between his teeth, even when he laid his poor head upon the block. But as he spoke to Angelica, he forgot about the rose, and of course it dropped out of his mouth. The romantic princess stooped and seized it. "Sweet rose!" she exclaimed. "That bloomed upon my Bobo's lips, never will I part from thee." And she placed it in her bosom. Then they went back to breakfast, and it appeared to Bobo that Angelica became more lovely every moment. Strange to say, it was Angelica now who didn't care about him. It seemed to her he was not handsome anymore. She thought they might postpone the marriage, but King Valoroso roared, "Pooh, stuff," in a terrible voice. "We'll have no more silly shallying. Call the archbishop, and let the prince and princess be married offhand." Now, during this time, Betsinda wandered on and on and on the great Crim Tartary road. An empty cart came by, and the driver, seeing a pretty girl trudging along with bare feet, good-naturedly gave her a seat. He said he lived at the edge of the forest, where his old father was a woodman, and if she liked, he would take her so far on the road. Evening came, and all the black pines were bending with snow, and there at last was the comfortable light beaming in the woodman's windows. So they arrived and went into his cottage. He was an old man and had a number of children who were just at supper with nice hot bread and milk. They jumped up and clapped their hands, and when they saw the pretty stranger, they ran to her and brought her to the fire and rubbed her poor little feet and brought her bread and milk. "Look, father," they said, "see what pretty cold feet she has, and see what an odd cloak she has, just like the bit of velvet that hangs up in our cupboard, which you found that day the cubs were killed by King Padella in the forest. And look, she has around her neck just such another little shoe as you brought home, and have shown us so often, a little blue velvet shoe." "What's all this about a shoe and a cloak?" said the woodman. Then Betsinda explained that she had been left when quite a little child with this cloak and this shoe. She remembered having been in a forest and having lived in a cave with lions, and before that in a fine house as fine as the king's in town. When the woodman heard this, he was astonished. He went to his cupboard and took out a stocking of 5-shilling piece of King Cavolfiore and vowed it was exactly like the young woman. And then he produced the shoe and a piece of velvet and compared them with the things which Betsinda wore. And Betsinda's little shoe was written, "Hopkins, maker to the royal family." So in the other shoe was written, "Hopkins, maker to the royal family." And the inside of Betsinda's piece of cloak was embroidered Prin Rosal, and another piece of cloak was embroidered Ses Ba, number 246, so that the cloak was embroidered, when put together, You read Princess Rosalba, number 246. On seeing this, the dear old woman fell down on his knees, saying, "O my princess, O my rightful queen of Crim Tartary, I hail thee. I do thee homage." And he rubbed his venerable nose 3 times on the ground and put the princess's foot on his head. Why, said she, "my good woodman, you must be nobleman of my royal father's court, for under the name of Betsinda, Her Majesty Rosalba, Queen of Crim Tartary, had read of the customs of all foreign courts and nations." "Lord Spanachi, once," said the good old man. "The humble woodman, these 15 years," said the tyrant Padella, "dismissed me. First lord of the toothpick and joint keeper of the snuff-box, I mind me," said Betsinda. "Thou heldest these posts under our royal shire. They are restored to thee. Rise, Marquis of Spinachi." And with indescribable majesty, the queen, who had no sword handy, waved the pewter spoon which she had been taking her bread and milk over the bald head of the old nobleman, whose tears made a puddle on the ground, and his children went to bed that night. Lords and ladies, Bartolomeo, Ubaldo, Caterina, and Ottavia degli Spinachi. The old Marquis of Spinachi said that the whole country groaned under Padella's tyranny, and longed to return to its rightful sovereign. And elated as it was, he sent his children, who knew the forest well, to summon the noblemen, and that. So her Majesty followers gathered, and they made a crown of gilt paper and a robe of cotton velvet. And there they came to her service, a powerful warrior by the name of Count Hogganarmo, whose helmet was so large it took 2 strong African-American to carry it. Rosalba felt afraid of him, even while he knelt before her. His eyes scowled at her from his whiskers, which grew clear up to them. "Madame," he said, "my hand is free. I offer it my heart and my sword to your service. My 3 wives lie buried in my ancestral vaults. Deign to be mine, and I swear to bring to your bridal table the head of King Padella and the eyes and nose of his son, Prince Bobo." "Oh, sir," Rosalba said, withdrawing her hand in fright, "your lordship is exceedingly kind, but I am already attached to a young gentleman named Prince Giglio, and never can I marry anyone but him." Who can describe Hogganarmo's wrath at this remark? Rising up from the ground, he ground his teeth and said, "Rejected! The bold Hogganarmo rejected! All the world shall hear of my rage, and you, madam, you shall all rue it." And kicking the 2 African-American before him, he rushed away, his whiskers streaming in the wind. In another half hour, he banged his way through the army of poor Rosalba and took the queen a prisoner. "Get a horse, Van," he cried to his grooms. "Clap the hussy into it, and send her with my compliments to his majesty, King Padella." So this poor queen was driven to Padella and thrust into a dungeon. Meantime, the idea of marrying such an old creature as Gruffanuff had so frightened Prince Giglio that he had packed his trunks and taken an early coach out of Paflagonia. When they stopped to change horses at Boginga, a very ordinary-looking young woman with a bag under her arm asked for a place in the coach. All the inside places were taken, and the young woman was informed that she must go up on the roof. But the poor woman coughed very much, and Giglio pities her. "I will give up my place to her," said he. Then he sprang up gaily on the roof of the diligence. A traveler got out at the next station, so Giglio went inside and talked to the person next to him. She appeared to be a well-informed and entertaining female, and she gave Giglio all sorts of things out of the bag she carried: cold fowl, slices of ham, and most delicious pieces of plum pudding. As they traveled, the queer woman talked to Giglio on a variety of subjects in which the poor prince showed his ignorance. He owned with many blushes how ignorant he was, on which the lady said, "My dear Giglio, oh, my good young man, you have plenty of time before you. You have nothing to do but to improve yourself. Who knows but that you may find your use of knowledge some day, when you may be wanted at home." "Good heavens, madam," says Giglio, "do you know me?" "I know a number of funny things," said the lady. "I advise you to stay at the town where the coach stops for the night. Stay there and study, and when you want anything, look in this bag which I leave you." "And to whom shall I be grateful, madam?" says Giglio. "To the fairy Blackstick," says the lady, flying out of the window. Giglio thought he had been dreaming, but there was the bag which Blackstick had given him. And when he came to the town, he took it in his hand. Now this town where Giglio arrived was celebrated University town of Bosforo. Giglio took lodgings opposite the schools, and when he opened his trunk, which they day before had filled with his clothes, he found it contained only books, and in his bag, when Giglio looked in it, he found a student's cap and gown, and a writing book, an inkstand, pens, and a dictionary, which was very useful to him as his spelling had been very sadly neglected. So Giglio sat down and worked away very hard for a year. One day, after the examinations, as he was diverting himself at a coffee house with two friends, he chanced to look in the Bosforo Chronicle and read off quite easily, for he could read and write the longest words now, the following romantic circumstance. It will be remembered that when the present sovereign of Crim-Tartary, revered sovereign of Crim-Tartary, His Majesty King Padella took possession of the throne, after having vanquished the late King Cavolfiore, that prince's only child, the Princess Rosalba, was not found in the royal palace, and it was said had strayed into the forest where she had been eaten up by lions. Remains of a cloak and a shoe were found in the forest during a hunting party, and these interesting relics of an innocent little creature were kept by their finder, the Baron Spinacci, formerly an officer in Cavolfiore's household. Last Tuesday week, Baron Spinacci and a number of gentlemen attached to the former dynasty appeared in arms crying, "God save Rosalba, Queen of Crim-Tartary," and surrounding a lady whom report described as beautiful exceedingly. This parsonage stated that she was left in the palace of garden of Bloembondinga, where Her Royal Highness the Princess Angelica, with that elegant benevolence which has always distinguished the heiress of the throne of Paphlagonia, gave the little outcast a shelter and a home. She was educated in the palace in a menial capacity under the name of Betsinda, but she did not give satisfaction and was dismissed, carrying with her part of a mantle and a shoe which she had on her, which when first found, on the very same morning when she left, Prince Giglio, nephew to the King of Paphlagonia, also quitted Bloembondinga and has not been heard of since. Second edition express, we heard that the troop under Baron Spinacci has been utterly routed by General Count Haganarmo. "My good friend," said Giglio, "Lisa," when he had finished reading, "disguised and is henceforth useless, I am not Giglio. And I saw Betsinda, Rosalba, the blushing sum of all protection." The prince and his friends hastened home, highly excited by the intelligence. "Lisa," Giglio went to his bag, opened it, and what do you think he found? A splendid gold-handled sword. And on the sheath was embroidered, "Rosalba, forever." And now his trunk opened with, "Lisa, come here," came a shining steel helmet. "Come here and lay down." "No, we're not getting that. Come and lay down." A pair of spurs, finally complete suit of armor. The books on Giglio's shelves were all gone. Where there had been dictionaries, Giglio's friends found helmets, breastplates, swords, etc. And that evening 3 cavaliers might have been seen issuing from the gates of Bosforo. They never drew bridle until they reached the Lisa, come on! Last town of the frontier before you come to Crim-Tartary. Here they stopped and refreshed at a hostel. As they were drinking, the marketplace filled with soldiers, and Giglio, looking forth, recognized the Paphlagonian banners. "It is my friend, my gallant Captain Headsoff," Giglio cried. "Oh, Headsoff, hither march, my Paphlagonians." Headsoff's head fell. "My lord," he said, "we march as the allies of great Padella, Crim-Tartary's monarch." "Crim-Tartary's usurper, Crim-Tartary's grim tyrant," said the prince on the balcony quite sarcastically. "Lisa," and stepping well forward, "Lisa, the royal youth will lay down here." "No, you come and lay down." The royal, no, you lay down. The royal delivered a speech so magnificent that no report can do justice to it. It lasted for 3 days and 3 nights, during which not a single person who heard him was tired or remarked the difference between daylight and dark. At the end of the extraordinary effort, Captain Headsoff flung up his helmet and cried, "Hooray, hooray! Long live King Giglio!" Meantime, as King Padella was a widower, he went to his captive Rosalba, and offered to marry her that instant. But she declined his invitation in her usual polite, gentle manner, stating that Prince Giglio was her love. Uttering awful imprecations, His Majesty bade Lisa, bade her, Alexander, give it to her. Bade her death on the following, give it to her. Following morning, cutting off her head was much too easy a death. He bethought himself of a pair of fierce lions, which had lately been sent to him, and determined to hunt poor Rosalba down with these ferocious beasts. The lions were kept in a cage, and their roaring might be heard over the whole city, the inhabitants of which thronged in numbers to see a poor young lady gobbled up by wild beasts. The princess was brought out in her nightgown, with all her beautiful hair falling down her back, looking so pretty that even the keepers of the wild— Give it back, Alexandra! Give it back now! The animals wept plentifully at seeing her, and the gates were opened, and with whirra, whirra, wara, wara, the two great, lean, hungry lions rushed out of their den. But oh, strange event! When the lions came to Rosalba, instead of devouring her with great teeth, it was the kisses they gobbled her up. They seemed to say, "Dear sister, don't you recollect your brothers in the forest?" And she put her white arms around their tawny necks and kissed them. King Padella was astonished. Count Hogginarmo was disgusted. "Pooh," the count said, "these lions are tame beasts. I believe they are little boys dressed up in doormats." "Ho," said the king. "Lisa, Alexandra, give it to her.
No.
Give it to her."
I want it.
You want me to stop reading?
Yes, please. I'm going to go with my tablet and give her.
No, you're not going to get your tablet tonight.
Why?
"I believe they are little boys dressed up in doormats." "Oh," said the king, "you dare say this to your sovereign? There are no lions, aren't they, my bodyguard? Take Count Hogginarmo and fling him to the circus. Let him fight these lions." The haughty Hogginarmo looked scowling around. "Your Majesty thinks Hogginarmo is afraid," he said. "No, not of 100,000 lions." And he jumped down into the circus. Whirr, 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 whirr. In about 2 minutes, the Count Hogginarmo was gobbled up by those lions, bones, boots, and all. And there was an end of him. "Serves him right," said the king. "And now, as the lions won't eat the young woman, let the beef-eaters chop her into pieces. Lisa, come here to me. Come here to me." There was a dead silence then, which was broken by a parang, parang, pang, pangarang, and a knight herald rode in at the further end of the circus. We're almost done with this. You don't want to finish it? No, you're not going to have the tablet tonight.
Why?
Because you're not being good.
Daddy, I will be.
Now, do you want the end of this story or not?
I want my tablet.
No.
I'll be good.
No, I'm going to finish the story.
Why don't I get?
Because you're taking stuff from your sister and you're making her cry.
I'll be good.
Well, then sit down and listen to the story. There was a dead silence then, which was broken by a parang, 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 and a knight herald rode in at the further end of the circus. "Ha!" exclaimed the king, "by my fay, 'tis the gallant Captain Headsoff." "What news from Paphlagonia, gallant Headsoff?" The herald took a sheet of paper out of his hat and began to read. "Lisa, quiet. Know all men by these presents that we, Giglio, king of Paphlagonia, sovereign prince of Turkey, and the Sausage Islands, having assumed our rightful throne in— Lisa, stop it. Long time falsely born by usurping uncle, styling himself king of Paphlagonia. Ah, growled Padella. Thereby summons the false traitor, Padella, calling himself king of Crim Tartary. The king curses were dreadful. The release from cowardly imprisonment his rightful sovereign Rosalba, queen of Crim Tartary, and restore her to her rightful throne, in default of which I, Giglio, proclaim," she said, "Padella, sneak, traitor, humbug, usurper, and coward, I challenge him to meet me with pistols, alone or at the head of his army, and will prove my words upon his wicked body." "Is that all?" said Padella with terrific calm of concentrated fury. "And what says my brother of Paphlagonia to this rubbish? The king's uncle has been deprived of his crown." "He unjustly war," said Headsoff. "After the battle of Bombardaro, his whole army came over to our side, with the exception of Prince Bobo." "Ah, my boy, my Bobo was no traitor," cried Padella. "Prince Bobo, far from coming over to us, ran away, sir. But I caught him," said Headsoff. "The prince is a prisoner in our army, and terrific tortures await him. But the hair of Princess Rosalba's head is injured." "Do they?" exclaimed the furious Padella, who was now perfectly livid with rage. "Oh, torturers! Light up the fires and make the pincers hot. Get lots of boiling lead. Bring out Rosalba." Instantly, Captain Headsoff rode off to King Giglio's camp. "Lisa, quiet, come here." News of Rosalba. With news of Rosalba. The The brutal truth. The brutal, ruthless ruffian, royal wretch, Giglio exclaimed, Go, some of you, and bring Prince Bobo hither. Bobo was brought in chains, looking very uncomfortable. Oh, my poor Bobo, said his majesty. Hast thou heard the news? Thy brutal father has condemned Rosalba, put her to death. Lisa, come here. Come here. Come up on the bed. No, come on the bed. Come. I will finish it. It's almost over. Thy brutal father has condemned Rosalba. Put her to death. What killed Betsinda? Boo hoo hoo hoo, cried out Bobo. And now think what must have been the feelings of the most merciful of monarchs. When must have been the feelings of the most merciful of monarchs when he informed his prisoner that in consequence of King Padella's cruel and dastardly behavior, Prince Bobo must be executed at 8 o'clock next morning. The noble Giglio could not restrain his tears. Prince Bobo was taken back to his dungeon, where every attention was paid to him. The gaoler's wife sent him tea. The undertaker came and measured him for the handsomest coffin which money could buy. Even this didn't console Bobo. The cook brought him some dishes and what he once used to like, but he wouldn't touch them. He sat down and began writing an adieu to Angelica. Then he got up on the top of the hat box, on the top of a chair, on the top of his bed, on the top of his table, and he looked out to see whether he might escape. As the clock kept always ticking, but looking out of the window was one thing and jumping another, and the town clock struck 7. So he got into bed for a little sleep, but the jailer came and woke him and said, "Get up, your royal highness, if you please. It's 10 minutes to 8. So poor Bobo got up, and he saw the soldiers who had come for him. "Lead on," he said, and they led the way deeply affected. They came out into the square, and there was King Giglio, come to take leave of Bobo. His Majesty kindly shook hands with him, and the gloomy procession marched on, when hark! Ha! Whirr, 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 whirr! A roar of wild beasts was heard, and who should come riding into the town, frightening away the boys but Rosalba? The fact is, the lions had made a dash at the open gate, gobbled up the beef eaters in a jiffy, and away they went with Rosalba on the back of one of them, and they carried her turn and turn about till they came to the city, where the Prince Giglio's army was encamped. When the king heard of the queen's arrival, he rushed out of his breakfast room to hand her Majesty off her lion. "Prince Bobo is reprieved this time," he said, and most graciously he invited him to breakfast. As soon as King Padella heard that his victim had escaped him, his fury knew no bounds. He ordered out his whole army, but King Giglio's advanced. Lisa? Advanced guard kept him acquainted with the enemy's dealings, and he was in no wise disconcerted. On the contrary, he did everything to amuse and divert the princess, gave her a most elegant breakfast, dinner, lunch, and got up a ball for her that evening. Dancing the 25th polka with Rosalba, he remarked with wonder the ring she wore. Then Rosalba told him how she had got it from Gruffanuff, who no doubt had picked it up when Angelica flung it away. "Yes," says the fairy Blackstick, who had come to see the young people. "That ring I gave Giglio's mother. It is enchanted."
Lisa, touch my eye.
No, Alexandra, stop it.
You can. Look.
Don't.
Wait, I want that.
"Rosalba needs no ring, I am sure," says Giglio. "She is beautiful enough, and my eyes without any enchanted aid." "Oh, sir," said Rosalba. "We're almost done with Lisa. Let's finish. Let's finish this." "Take off the ring and try," said the king, and drew the ring off her finger. In his eyes, she looked just as handsome as before. "Bobo, my poor lad, come and try on this ring," said the king. "The Princess Rosalba makes it a present to you." No sooner had Bobo put it on, but lo and behold, he appeared an agreeable young prince enough, and the fairy Blackstick said, "Now you see what I said from the first, that a little misfortune had done you good. You, Giglio, had been bred in prosperity, would scarcely have learned to read or write. You would have been idle and extravagant, and could not have been a good king as now you will be. You, Rosalba, would have been so flattered that your head might have been turned like Angelica's. Oh, you darling, says Giglio to Rosalba, and he was just holding out his arms in order to give her a hug, when a messenger came rushing in and said, My lord, the enemy, to arms, cries Giglio. Oh, mercy, says Rosalba, and fainted, of course. He snatched one kiss from his lips and rushed forth to the field of battle. Fine blows are struck, dreadful wounds delivered. I know she won't get her tablet because of it. Bugles blow, drums beat, horses neigh, fifes sing, soldiers roar. In a word, the overthrow of King Padella was complete. No, you're not listening. To acknowledge Rosalba as your rightful queen and give up the crown and treasures, ask Giglio. If I must, I must, said Padella, who were naturally very Yes. There, and they tied his hands behind him and bound his legs tight under his horse, having set him his face to the tail, and he was led back to the King Giglio's quarters and thrust into the dungeon. All was now joy in King Giglio's circle. Dancing, feasting, fun, illuminations, and jollifications of all sorts ensued. Their majesties were never separated during the whole day, but breakfasted, dined, and supped together. It was agreed they should be married as soon as they reached the capital, and orders were dispatched to the Archbishop of Blombodinga to hold himself in readiness to perform the interesting ceremony. Duke Hedzoff carried the message, and immediately he seized Glumboso, the ex-prime minister, and made him refund their considerable sum of money, which the old scoundrel had secreted out of the late king's treasure. He also clapped Valoroso into prison. So these two ex-royal personages were sent for a year to the House of Correction. The Fairy Blackstick, as they were riding in triumphal progress toward Giglio's capital, exhorted him to deal justly by his subjects and never break his promise when he had once given it. Why is Fairy Blackstick always warning me to keep my word? Does she suppose I'm not a man of honor? Asked Giglio testily. When the royal party arrived at the last stage, before they reached Blombodinga, who should be in waiting in her carriage there but the Prince Angelica? She rushed into her husband's arms and had no eyes but for Bulbo, who appeared perfectly lovely to her on account of the fairy ring which he wore, whilst she herself, wearing the magic rose in her bonnet, seemed entirely beautiful to the enraptured Bulbo. A splendid luncheon was served, of which all our friends partook. What could have induced this hideous old Gruffanuff to dress up in such an absurd way, says Giglio to Rosalba, and a figure of fun Gruffy certainly was. She was dressed in a white silk dress, with lace over a wreath of white roses on her wig, a lace veil, and her yellow old neck was covered with diamonds. She ruled the king in such a manner that his majesty burst out laughing. Alexandra, quiet, we're almost finished. We must be at church before 12, sighs out Gruffanuff in a languishing voice, hiding her old face behind her fan. And then I shall be the happiest man in my dominions, cries Giglio, with an elegant bow to the blushing Rosalba. Oh, my Giglio, exclaims Gruffanuff, can it be that this happy moment at length has arrived and I am about to become the enraptured bride of my adored Giglio? Lend me a smelling bottle, somebody. I certainly shall faint with joy. You, my bride, roars out Giglio. You, marry my prince, cried poor little Rosalba. Pooh, nonsense, the woman's mad, exclaimed the king. I should like to know who else is going to be married, if I am not, shrieked Gruffanuff. Has not Prince Giglio promised to marry his Barbara? Is not this Giglio's signature? And she handed the archbishop the document the prince had signed. Said the archbishop. The document is certainly a document. Is it your handwriting, Giglio? Cried the Fairy Blackstick. Yes, poor Giglio gasped out. I had forgotten the confounded paper. Help the queen. Someone, her majesty, has fainted. But Gruffanuff flung her arms round the archbishop's neck and bellowed out, Justice, justice, my lord chancellor. Won't you take that sum of money which Glumboso hid? Said Giglio's 218,000 millions. I will have that. And you too, said Gruffanuff. Let us throw the crown jewels into the bargain, gasped Giglio. I will wear them by Giglio's side, said Gruffanuff. Giglio was half mad with rage by this time. I will not marry her, he says. Oh, fairy, fairy, give me counsel. Why is Fairy Blackstick always warning me to keep my word? Does she suppose that I am not a man of honor? Said the fairy, quoting Giglio's own haughty words. He quailed under his brightness of her eyes. There was no escape from that.
Another number.
Well, said he in a dreadful voice, Countess, let us be married. I can keep my word, but I can die afterwards. Oh, dear Giglio, cries Gruffanuff, skipping up. I knew I could trust thee. Rosalba did not faint again. Though she loved Giglio more than her life, she was determined that as she told the fairy, not to cause him to break his royal word. I cannot marry him, but I shall love him always, says she. So the fairy kissed Rosalba with peculiar tenderness. Before the ceremony at the church, it was the custom in Paphlagonia for the bride and bridegroom to sign the contract of marriage. So the party drove to the palace. Rosalba stepped out of her coach, supported by Bulbo, and stood almost fainting to have a last look at her dear Giglio. As for Blackstick, she was now standing at the palace door. Giglio came up the steps with his horrible bride on his arm, looking as pale as if he was going to an execution. Are you determined to make this poor young man unhappy, says Blackstick, to marry him? Yes. What business is that of yours, cries Gruffanuff. You won't take the money he offered you. No. You won't let him off his bargain, though you know you cheated him when you made him sign the paper. Impudence! Policeman, remove this woman, cries Gruffanuff. The policemen were rushing forward, but with a wave of her wand, the fairy struck them all like so many statues in their places. You won't take anything in exchange for your bond? Cries the fairy. You won't take anything in exchange for your bond? Cries the fairy with an awful severity. I speak for the last time. No, shrieks Gruffanuff, stamping with her foot. I'll have my husband, my husband, my husband. You shall have your husband, the fairy Blackstick cried, and advancing a step, laid her hand on the nose of the knocker. As she touched it, the brass nose seemed to elongate. The eyes rolled wildly. The arms and legs uncurled themselves. The knocker expanded into a figure in yellow livery, 6 feet high, and Jenkins Gruffanuff once more trod the threshold off which he had been lifted more than 20 years ago. Master's not at home, says Jenkins, just in his old voice, and Mrs. Jenkins, giving a dreadful yelp, fell down in a fit, in which nobody minded her, for everybody was shouting, Hosay! Hosay! Long live the king and queen! The bells were ringing, the guns were roaring, Bulbo was embracing everybody, the Lord Chancellor was flinging up his wig and shouting like a madman. Headsoff had got the Archbishop round the waist, and they were dancing a jig. And as for Giglio, I leave you to imagine what he was doing if he kissed Rosalba once, twice, 20,000 times. I'm sure I don't think he was wrong. So Gruffanuff opened the hall door with a low bow, just as he had been accustomed to do. And they all went in and signed the book. And then they went to the church and were married. And the fairy Blackstick sailed away on her cane and was never more heard of in Paphlagonia. The end.